I need to introduce to you our next speaker for this evening, by the name of Dr. Wayne Schmidt. In January of 2010, Dr. Wayne Schmidt became the first vice president for the newly formed Wesley Seminary at IWU, providing strategic and operational leadership and shaping a revolutionary way to prepare ministries. He previously, as senior pastor of Kentwood Community Church, I'm sure many of you may know him in that respect, and helped it develop into a flagship church in the Wesleyan denomination that became increasingly multi-ethnic as it reached the increasingly diverse greater Grand Rapids, Michigan. Wayne has been married to Jan since 1978, and together they have 3 children, Chris, Jordan, and Elise. So please, do me the favor of giving a warm CCDA welcome to my brother, Dr. Wayne Schmidt.
Well, it's a delight to have a few moments with you this evening, to be back in Grand Rapids. It's always great to be back here and to be with CCD folks and to share these moments. I love the theme of this conference, momentum. And over the past few years, I've been a student of momentum. I'm intrigued by the stewardship of momentum. I think just as we steward time and money, we steward momentum. When you have momentum, things seem better than they are. When you lack momentum, things seem worse than they are. When you have momentum, things seem better than they are, and the danger is deception. You think you are making a difference. You think you're all that. You think you should present at sessions like this. When you lack momentum, things seem worse than they are, and the danger is discouragement. And you wonder if anything you're doing is making a difference. Well, I've become convinced that key to the power of momentum is the power of and. It's doing things together. I've been privileged over these years. It seems like lightning has struck twice. For 30 years, I was so blessed to be part of a great church family, Kentwood Community Church, and to serve with an amazing team of people. And then unexpectedly, God transitioned me. And I ended up at a place where once again I get to work with this amazing group of people. And I realized the reason that lightning has struck twice is because God looked down from heaven and said, "That boy needs help." And I'm going to put around him some people so that together they can do more than either of them or any of them could have done on their own. There are so many reasons I appreciate the CCDA, but one of the reasons is they get the and. They get the power of partnership. I first saw this in the local church, Kentwood Community Church. Rich Avery, who's one of the pastors there, and there's a great group of KCCers here today, and they've spread out among all the sessions to learn and to drink in what's been shared this day. It was back in 1999 that Rich went to a CCDA conference, came back to our local church, and began to plant in us some of the principles of CCD. Little did I know that God was preparing. Have you ever noticed that at the time you're oblivious to what God is doing, but you can look back and have an aha moment of what God was doing? And at the time, one of the times of severest conflict in the life of our church, 1999, at least a couple of significant things happened. One is Rich went to CCD and began to implant in KCC, I'll try to keep all these initials straight, the principles that would help us to more greatly serve our community, our changing community. The second was a young couple, newlyweds, Kyle and Petra Ray, came to the church at that time. He was an engineer and she was in HR, and they got involved and sensed the call to ministry, served on the team, and God placed a hand on his head and shoulders to become the next senior pastor of Kentwood Community Church. And as an African-American leader, having attended University of Michigan, which he is proud to mention on any occasion he gets the opportunity, much to my chagrin, and having served in settings where multi-ethnic interaction was so required, God raised up just the right person in order to provide leadership to that church. So it was local, the local church partnering with CCDA. And then I moved to the seminary, and I'm a pastor. I'm not an educator by profession, though I have the highest of regard for them. And I had the privilege of being in the beginning of the seminary. And I said, who would I want to have as partners at the very beginning of the seminary, realizing that those partnerships will shape the seminary for the rest of its life? And one of those first partnerships, CCDA. And when we started our Spanish language Masters of Divinity, about 15% of our students do their work primarily in Spanish. Part of what motivated that was some things I learned about connecting to people in their heart language, and I learned in settings like this. Or when we started our urban cohorts, predominantly African American, in the city of Indianapolis, some of the things we learned and taught in the contextualization of that was a result of things learned here. So it's local, it's educational, but I want to risk for the next few moments talking about one more dimension of partnership. It's a word that's unpopular today. It's denominational. I am privileged to belong to the Wesleyan Church. We are privileged as a church to have a partnership with the CCDA. We are privileged to have our General Superintendent, Dr. Joanne Lyon, be very involved in the national movement of CCDA. One of the first things when she was elected as our bishop was she formed that partnership. And I have watched that unfold, the benefits of it. So two are better than one. Have you heard this before? Ecclesiastes talks about it. I'm so glad I discovered it when I married Jan years ago. I married up. Two are better than one, much better. When I formed my accountability partnership 30 years ago, this past January, a guy I sat across from every 2 weeks for 30 years. So we live inspected lives. Two are better than one. Because they have a good return for their work. When one falls, the other helps them up. They keep warm together. I love that. There's a warmth that comes from relationship. They can defend each other. Well, let me give you my 4 reasons I think two are better than one when the CCDA partners locally, educationally, denominationally. Here's the first of those. Two are better than one because they ignite innovation. I had to write this down because I'm a morning person. I like to start early, and I thought, at this time of night, I better write it down so we can all read it off the screen. The stimulation of kingdom entrepreneurism to counter denominational drift towards bureaucracy, uniformity, and easy. It takes partnerships to stimulate that entrepreneurism. I'm interested in what I'll call ecumenical entrepreneurism. I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here. I've been part of many ecumenical gatherings over the years. Here's my risk. You don't have to agree with me. In fact, I only account it a good talk if someone actively disagrees with something I said. So I may be successful right at this point. But I think ecumenical relationships as an end in themselves rarely endure. In my experience, the ecumenical relationships that led to being together, which led to doing together something that could not be done alone, that shoulder to shoulder, let's climb the mountain, let's take the hill together, that has been the richest of ecumenical relationships. It's a kingdom entrepreneurism. This past Wednesday, I was in Chicago meeting with a group, Church Multiplication Network, and most of them were Wesleyans in the group. I was sitting next to, at lunch, a guy named Ed Rocket. Isn't that a great name? When you have a name like Wayne Schmidt, you really look for people with great names. So I was sitting next to Ed Rocket. And I thought, wow, I didn't even know we had a rocket in the Wesleyan church, and we don't. I said, how did you happen to become part of this multiplication group? I'm intrigued. You're not connected with the Wesleyan church. He says, well, I was at the National CCDA conference, and I went up to this booth. I talked about some things happening in the Wesleyan church. And I met some people with connections to Chicago, and I enjoyed the conversation. And I'm here to join in the conversation about church multiplication in urban Chicago. How did that happen? And what will it lead to? Innovation. Here's the second. These partnerships bring out the best in us. They reinvigorate latent denominational DNA. Now, some of you, again, the skepticism about denominations, you wonder if denominations have DNA, if there is life. But the partnership, well, let's use my denomination as a background. Our namesake is John Wesley. Many people find it ironic that I'm actually an alum of this place, John Calvin Seminary, when I'm part of a denomination that goes back to John Wesley. How did a Wesleyan end up at a Calvin seminary, you ask? Well, I was a pastor. I came here as a church planner. I said, I'm Wesleyan. We go back to Wesley. His first name was John. They're Calvinists. They go back to Calvin. His first name was... How different can it be? John Wesley in the 1700s practiced an innovation he got from George Whitefield called field preaching. Instead of staying within the walls of the Anglican Church, where people were not allowed to attend if they were poor or uncultured, he went out into the fields. 33 years after he started field preaching 33 years, this proper Anglican priest, John Wesley, said, "I still hate field preaching." His obedience to the Great Commission was greater than his preference. Obedience over preference. Huge. That's our DNA. He served the poor. He was an advocate against debtors' prisons. The last letter that he wrote to Wilberforce talking about the ills of slavery. Our denomination in North America, founded in 1843, was founded by abolitionists. It found its early mission in rescue missions. But, and this is a big but, we slowly migrated from the cities to the rural areas, not because of the mission. Some of you are here from rural areas, and I love the way CCDA is migrating to the rural areas. That vision for community development in rural communities, huge. We didn't go because we were called to something. We went because we were fleeing from something. We wanted protection and sameness. And these abolitionists, back when the civil rights movement came along, we had no voice. We were silent and stood as silent witnesses to the injustices. Thank God that DNA, going back to Wesley, going back to our founding, is being reinvigorated. And part of the reason it's being reinvigorated is because we're rubbing shoulders with people who care about justice, who care about communities being transformed, who believe the power of the gospel is even greater than the greatest of challenges. And something comes alive in us when we're around those who have a passion just a little bit ahead of ours. Third reason. These partnerships, these and relationships, have a way of energizing the emerging influencers. You know, when you begin this work in a denomination, there's only a few. And those few, you've heard the phrase, few and far between. It's like coals of a fire that's separated. The best way to put out a fire is to separate the coals. If you can just get a few and spread them out, it'll die out. And when there were just a few who had this vision for community development, there weren't enough to do anything together within our movement. We needed a place to go with other like-minded believers so those coals could be brought together and a flame could spring forth. That place has been the CCDA. Here's the last one. To activate what's important. To make greater progress towards our stated priorities. That's the fourth one there, if you want to go ahead and put it up for those who may be taking notes. Fuel greater progress towards our stated priorities. There are so many things I loved about the opportunity to serve at Kentwood Community Church. One of those was the journey it took to becoming multi-ethnic and multi-economic. When we started the church in 1979, I can't even remember back to 37 years of age. That was 2 decades ago. But when this kid was included in this church planning group, Kentwood was about 98% Anglo. And of that 98%, about 80% of them were Dutch. Very strong subculture on the south side, southeast side of Grand Rapids. Today, 35 years later, in that community, Kentwood, a suburb of Grand Rapids, over 70 nationalities on the birth certificates of children in Kentwood Public Schools. As so often happens, communities change, churches don't. And we got out of sync with our community. And in 1999, something began to awaken. Part of it was that we as a church would become a church that reflects heaven and our community. The other was that we would multiply more than ever new churches. Well, we planted 2 churches in Grand Rapids. One, City Life, pastored by Adam and Christy Lipscomb, a couple that's been very engaged in the CCDA. The other, we had a hand in, Troy Evans and the Edge Urban Fellowship. I love church planting because you can do something that's completely different than who you are. I went to the Edge one Saturday night. It's a multi-ethnic church. I said, I'm part of a multi-ethnic church. I can do this. They reach the hip-hop culture. It's the only service I've been to where they have a mosh pit up front. I didn't know what that was. I had to ask about it. What Troy and LaDawn are doing is so completely different from anything that we could have envisioned. What helps this suburban church, first-ring suburb, changing suburb, but what helps a suburban church plant urban congregations? Where do they go to get what they need to know? They went to the CCDA. So I'm thankful we have a leader who understands power, the denominations and power, but also understands sharing, learning, humbling ourselves to learn what we need to from others. And so I think of it in a very simple way. The partnership, the and between CCDA and the Wesleyan Church, one denomination, I hope one of many that connects in this partnership. The power of that partnership is deep and wide. Now, when I hear that phrase, deep and wide, my mind goes back to a Sunday school song I learned. Some of you can relate to this, yeah? You've heard great music tonight, so I'm not going to share any music with you because I wouldn't want to ruin that moment. But in our church, we sang Deep and Wide. And we were really creative. After Deep and Wide, we went to Wide and Deep. That just changed it up there. And but the power of and is that it helps you to deeply connect with the things that are in you that are most valuable and enduring. And then it helps you to widely transmit those to people and in places you could have never imagined God would use you and include you. The power of and. God bless you.